On-site coverage of the Precious Metals Summit is brought to you by Borealis Mining.
Hello, welcome back. We're on day 2 of the Precious Metals Summit. I'm with Jonathan Eglow, President and CEO of Axo Copper. Jonathan, good to be with you.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me.
More than welcome. Obviously, we had a catch up a few months ago. This was right after, or maybe even just before you went public. I think it was in June, wasn't it? When you went public?
Yeah, correct.
Now, you're a few months in now of being a public company. How's the market reception been? And maybe even, I wouldn't mind just going back into the original. You were running this as a private company for a year or so. What first drew you to it?
Yeah, I mean, the initial draw to it was, as you can see from some of the press release that we've been putting out as of late, when we restarted the drilling program, is the grade is quite phenomenal. So we just put out a press release earlier this week, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more. But when I see things like 13 meters at 3% copper, that's something that has always caught my eye. I feel like a lot of the copper market can be oversaturated with some bigger, lower grade stories, which sure have value, but there's these smaller capital intensity, high grade stories, which I think we're proving up are a bit of an anomaly in the business.
Yeah.
And that's initially what drew me in when it was a private company.
Yeah. And I think, you are right, because a lot of the copper stories that we are seeing progressing are big copper gold porphyries or copper porphyries at billions in capex. Obviously, permitting usually takes a hell of a long time. This was a past producing mine, though, wasn't it? So you had a bit of oversight as to what the grades were, what the metallurgy was like, really, it looked like a pretty clean, very high grade copper mine.
Yeah.
Recently closed, and they only went down to 50 meters in terms of the open pit.
Yeah. So this was actually a recently operated mine by some local Mexicans, artisanal small scale miners, call it what you like, but they ran it from about 2019 to 2022. They explicitly took it from surface down to only about 40 meters. And, they didn't stop because they ran out of ore. The operation stopped because they were artisanal miners, and we struck an agreement with them and we acquired the project for ourselves. But you're right. In my mind, they kind of did this 3-year, almost like a bulk test sample for us. So they had a 250 ton per day mill. They were feeding high grades, like 4% plus of copper. We know the 250 ton per day mill they doing was recovering copper incredibly well. It was a very clean concentrate because we know the person who was buying the concentrate off the family. So yeah, they effectively had this, for the early stage nature of the project, it was actually significantly de-risked just by being an operating small scale mine right up until we acquired it.
Yeah, so you basically it was already almost at pilot stage, which usually if you were going to acquire a new project, it would take you quite a few years to get to, but you've already sort of have that background.
Yeah.
The big question with this was always, it was a risk in a sense because you needed to prove scale for it to be relevant to a publicly listed mining company or junior explorer. That you needed to really work out, is this big enough to be relevant for an institutional market and to really go into production and make enough cash. You've got some initial drilling now back from the summer campaign. How have they gone, and how is that sort of influencing how you're looking at the project?
The initial drilling has gone very well. And I think we've already kind of, even when we were a private company, before we decided to introduce it to the market and take it public, we wanted to know for ourselves that we kind of had something of scale that would be of interest, and we knew that we had it, which is when we decided to list. Because you're right, the family before we acquired it was operating at 250 ton per day. I'd say the overall high-level theory of what we're looking to do is, 250 ton per day was too small. We know it was an operating mine, should be an operating mine again. Let's do some drilling to see at what rate it should be restarted. The first drilling we did as a private company, we think already proved that it should be bigger, and it was of interest to the public markets. And then, of course, on the IPO, we had good interest and good reception from that as well. And the initial results have, we're trying to do down dip extensions. We're trying to extend it along strike. We have a drill rig that effectively had been starting at the known area, which is the small pit that the family was mining, and just systematically step out. And you can see from some of the results and the cross sections that we've had in our latest press release on Monday, you can see the contour of the pit that goes down 40 meters, and you see an array of drilling results at depth, and on that particular section down to deeper than 150 meters. and still putting out results like 13 meters at 3%, which aligns very well with what the family was mining. And also, it's to me, that's a fantastic result and a fantastic hole. It's like we just continuously prove that there's more of this high grade other than this small pocket that the family took out at surface.
Yeah, obviously where it is such high grade, the amount of volume that you're going to need for the amount of tons of copper in the ground is obviously going to be a lot smaller than other projects, so that the footprint's going to be a lot smaller, and it should in theory require less meters to drill out more tons in theory. Yep. But what's the number in mind that, do you have an ambition with the company in terms of, okay, we want to get to a certain size in terms of copper inventories so that we could then bring it onto production at, say, I don't know, X amount of tons per day or whatnot? Is there a goal?
Yeah, I mean, there is, internally, there are certain goals in terms of what we want to achieve and scale. I'd just say it's just a little bit too preliminary to, be discussing in, a public forum and setting this exact bar.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that, we've focused on an area that is 1.5 kilometers of strike. That's what we call as our priority area. The family only mined about 150 meters of that, but we're looking across 1,500 meters of it.
Yeah.
And down depth so far, we've proven at least 200 meters, and we're going to keep drilling sections below that to prove out more scale. So, something like that, when, someone else can run the numbers, because I'll get in legal trouble if I start declaring tons, because it's not 43101 compliant and it's not even a technical mineralized envelope. But I get in a lot of legal trouble from declaring an exact amount of tons, but you can look at what could be proven out over 1.5 kilometers of strike length by 400 meters of depth, which is an area that we're trying to cover, an unproven area for sure, but we found it on surface and we're trying to cover and drill that target out. That would be a meaningful scale for a high grade underground operation, which if you were to run it would be a significant multiple larger than what the family was doing of 250 ton per day.
Yeah, of course. Okay. All right. And so how's that exploration strategy going at the moment? You've got one rig on the mine at the moment. I guess, how do you foresee sort of how much drilling do you realistically need to do, and how long is this going to take to sort of prove up that 1.5 kilometer and obviously the 400 meters of depth?
Yeah. So on the back of the IPO, the 15,000 meter drill program that we've started up right now, the purpose of that program is not necessarily to drill at, resource density, because, in my mind, what we need to show right now is vast envelope and scale.
Yep.
Start to paint a picture for the market, which we think we see, but paint a picture for the market to connect some dots to prove out scale along that 1 to 1.5 kilometer trend. So the 15,000 meters is more about proving scale and concept, and that's really what we have in front of us right now. And of course, on the back of that, we'll see what we get from the 15,000 meters, and then see what the next phase of drilling would be warranted for the project. And then possibly on the back of that, maybe the next phase of drilling would be looking at a resource type drilling. But of course, one step at a time. We'll see what we get from the first 15,000 meters. And then go from there to see, I think it'll warrant a larger program personally next time. But, this 15,000 meters is really just a proof of concept, which I think we're proving out already with the first set of drill results we're putting out.
And how are you, I guess, distinguishing where you should be drilling in terms of, are you focusing more on proving up the depth, or because what you could be doing as well, obviously, which we've spoken about in the past, is where mineralization starts at surface in the known area in the previous mine. If that is the same throughout this whole area, you could just be putting sort of shorter holes in and proving that strike all the way along, really quite cost effectively, quite quickly, couldn't you?
Yeah, well, it's a combination of both, because for sure we're going to use to our benefit the fact that the deposit continues up to surface.
Yeah.
So we need to prove proof of concept at depth, which is why you're seeing some of these deeper holes in these deeper sections. But at the same time, you get very, very good bang for your buck when you're drilling 80-meter holes in an area that hasn't been tested, where the deposit continues to surface. And you can add tons that way, you can add new sections that way, keep it drilling along strike with some very, very short, inexpensive, quick-hitting holes. So I guess to answer your question, it is and it will have to be a combination of both, because we can't only test close to surface, because of course we need to prove depth extent. But if we exclusively drill deep, longer 300, 400 meter holes, then we're kind of missing out on the ability to, use the mineralization coming to surface to our advantage.
Yeah. Also, you called this a district opportunity in the past when we had an interview a few months ago, and it wasn't just this 1.5 kilometer strike length that excited you about the opportunity. You've done quite a lot of IP, you've done a lot of soil sampling, you've had some actually quite exciting results from surface. How does the rest of the district play into the exploration strategy at the moment?
Yeah, so up until last week, everything on the Phase 2 program that we restarted on the back of the IPO in June had been drilled with one drill rig. We just put a second drill rig on site now for the purpose of making a new discovery regionally. And in particular, there's an area to the south, which we just call La Huerta South. It's 3 kilometers further south of where the current drill was operating. We followed an IP anomaly down there earlier this year, basically looking for something similar to what we've already found at the main Las Marias trend. And what we were seeing was these results of 10, 11% copper at surface, kind of proving up proof of concept. We had to do more work in there to bring in some backhoes and scraping and just more target definition. But now it's ready to put a drill rig on it, where we put a drill rig on it just last week. So now we have 2 rigs operating, which I think is a great combination, where one should be delivering consistent results at Las Marias as we extend the main system, but the second looking for something new, looking for new discoveries, which when we're seeing 10% plus copper at surface, we think we have a good shot.
Nice, yeah. How should people be looking at this company in general? Because obviously there's a lot of exploration potential upside that we can be looking at, and you've got the district plane, you've got this huge strike length on the existing mineralization. So there's a lot of potential exciting, like really exciting drilling that could be coming out over the next few months or next year or so. But then you do also have this backdrop of, it was a producing mine not too long ago. You do have a lot of this sort of previous data. Are you an exploration strategy with a faster pathway into production? Is that the way that people should be looking at it? Or is this really at the moment just look at it as a pure play exploration company and sort of go from there?
Yeah, I'd look at it as the next 12 months as exploration company, but really we need to use our differentiating factor to our advantage, which is the fact that it was already significantly de-risked. It would be a lower capital intensity project. And so we would be looking to, of course, fast track it to production, not just drill our brains out forever. That's not necessarily how we would like to operate. But for sure, for this early drill program, prove out scale and a bit of proof of concept, but certainly look, to progress it to production, as quickly as we can. Okay,
good. In terms of when you are ready to potentially start looking at restarting the mine, what does the permitting pathway look like? Does the fact that it was in production at all help you, or do you need to go through that step by step all over again?
Yeah, I mean, we would be the fact that it was in production already would definitely help us. Of course, we'd have to, like all companies, apply for a new MIA, which is the environmental approval that you have to run through with Mexico. Mm-hmm. There'd be some advantages that we have past producing, of course. Because it would be it would be underground instead of open pits, so on a tons per day, relative to other mines in the country, on a tons per day, it would be lower than an open pit for sure, which means you could probably dry stack tailings. Yep. There'd be no cyanide use, of course. So the combination of low water draw, no cyanide use, already previously operating, very good local support. The locals were on board and well informed and supportive of this project and this operation, well before we even got our hands on it. They were very familiar with the family that was operating it before. The local ejido is on board. We've signed an agreement with them. So yeah, we'd have to go through the regular permitting process, but it does check a lot of boxes in terms of ease and not very much land disruption, just by the nature of being an underground.
Yeah, because it's so high grade, and yeah, of course. Yeah. This time next year, where do you want to be?
Well, this time next year, we would have finished our 15,000 meters. And on the back of that, I'd imagine we're doing something, larger program to be able to, better define and give people a better idea and answer your questions, for example, of, what exactly are we looking at in terms of tonnage to give people a better idea of what the mine would look like when restarted.
Amazing. All right, Jonathan, thank you for your time.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.